Welcome to the Top Order podcast. Guys, it's the end of the IPL 16. We're going to talk all things the final. Went into 3 days, which is longer than some test matches in India with these spinning wickets. We're also going to talk about England-Ireland's test preparation as well. Little folks and tongue. It sounds a little bit like a law firm, but we'll be going into all the debate around the preview of the first test of the English summer. All coming up on the Top Order podcast. Stay tuned. Well, boys, what you won't see off camera is, some non-verbal cues as to when the music has been queued up correctly. Hopefully, that's all worked smoothly on the roadcaster. But guys, we are at the end of IPL 16, aren't we? It's been a mammoth 74-game tournament. I think in terms of our predictions, look, I'm going to claim myself. I got it exactly right coming into finals week. So no spoilers really on this at all. We've got a scenario where we've got Gujarat and CSK played each other in, the Dominator, the Eliminator, something like that. CSK obviously went straight through. Gujarat played Mumbai Indians, and then the final was a repeat, not only of that first game of the final series, but also the first game of the tournament as well. So defending champions Gujarat Titans. And look, we'll talk about it in a lot of detail, but I know you're going to want to bring the New Zealand element in. So let's get that out the way first, and then we'll talk about, I guess, the final in a little bit more detail, and then the tournament as a whole as well.
Do you mean who was man of the match? Is that what you mean?
Well, if you look at any top order social media, it looks as if New Zealand cricket have masterminded this victory. But Lippy, I'll leave you to kind of go into that, I think.
Well, I think that's correct, isn't it? New Zealand won the IPL.
The IPL.
We've clocked the IPL now. We've done it before, but we've just done it again. I mean, I actually kind of want to start. I think we'll have plenty of chances to actually bring up New Zealand. There are quite a lot of New Zealand connections in this final. But did you guys I got really, really engaged in that final. I mean, it helped that the ICC, or the BCCI, I suppose, finally kind of connected and manufactured the game so that it was on at a perfect time, New Zealand time. My usual ritual was to kind of wake up in the morning, check the scores of the IPL, and when I went and checked, and it was 6 a.m. in the morning, and suddenly Chennai's about to go in and bat, and I was like, brilliant, I'm up, I'm in, and then just got totally gripped, and this is a tournament I think that we have kind of, been relatively critical of at times. It's a tournament that I think as New Zealand fans, you're not that connected to. I'm a guy that probably follows players rather than teams, which is not my usual style of supporting as a fan. But, I got totally engaged in this just as a sporting spectacle and how good it was to watch. And, by the end, there was real emotion. Like this was an awesome game and a great way to finish a great tournament.
Yeah, look, no arguments for me. I think on the tournament as a whole, I think we'll talk a little bit about the final in detail. But look, I think whatever we think about cricket, and I'm sure we're going to discuss it as we lead into that England-Ireland Test match and the impact that white ball cricket is having on Test cricket as well. The one thing for sure is the IPL is here to stay. We're 16 editions in. It's expanding in terms of its teams over the course of the last couple of years. It's expanding in terms of its reach with franchise owners owning, franchises in other tournaments around the world as well. But look, I've got to say, I think, we've obviously covered this for the last, 4 years or so on the podcast, haven't we, in terms of the IPL? But this is probably the first one that personally I've really been gripped by. Yeah. And I don't know why that is, whether I've just been slow to come around to it. A little bit like I've just got into Succession. I believe that may have finished. So please don't put any spoilers in the comments. But a little bit of a late review. The IPL's pretty good.
Yeah.
Raj?
I'm all teed up to talk about New Zealand, but no, it was a great final. Like you, unfortunately for me, it was at the wrong time. I had to roll out to a few meetings in the morning, but I was checking it constantly. The main features for me is what you actually have written down here on your sheet around what the Duckworth-Lewis impact was on that game, the timings of when it finished. Yeah. I'm a massive fan of playing cricket at 2 a.m. in the morning. I actually thought it was a great spectacle. And the point that you made there...
Feel free to bring your own prep up if you want.
The point that you made around expanding...
Yeah.
It's really incredible to see a tournament or a competition that hasn't actually lost quality when they have expanded those teams. I think the competition's only getting better and better, and that just shows the strength of Indian cricket at probably the lower levels as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wasn't it amazing that it was on at 1:30 in the morning? Like, I just think to, New Zealand here, and like, there's no way that it happened at Eden Park. There's no, like, you think about all the things that are going on there, and you can't have your lights on after this time, and all the noise, and just fantastic that it carried on that time. And I think you have to actually give the organisers like quite a bit of credit to say, 75,000 people, they stayed there till 1:30 in the morning. That shows you how big that tournament is.
Look, let's come on to that in a little bit of detail. I saw a couple of quotes from the umpire. So I think Rod Tucker was one of them and Nitin Menon the other. And Rod Tucker, I think, was looking at the playing conditions when he got asked in the rain delay. And he's like, we've got set till so-and-so to finish the game. And Nitin Menon just said, we'll get as much cricket in as we can. We'll give them as long as they need to kind of mop up. But I did raise this on the Slack channel, and it was mainly directed at, our head of algorithms, but Baldy. But let's talk a little bit about the Duckworth-Lewis, and let's talk a little bit about the finish time. So the game finished, I think, about 20-2. So there's an argument that if it's finishing at 20-2, why could it not just drag on another 20 minutes until 2 o'clock and actually go the full distance? In terms of the Duckworth-Lewis Stern, so we also get Mr. Stern, don't we? So let's give its full title. 214 off 20 overs, Gujarat. So that my maths tells me that's a run rate of about 10.7. CSK won it 170 off 15 overs, so run rate of 11.4 was required. But when they went off for that rain break, they had all of their resources in terms of 10 wickets plus an impact player. And I think arguably, and look, this is probably the debate and the piece around the mathematics that I'd like to get your views on. I always think having an impact batter in that situation. We saw Josh Little come in, I think, as the impact bowler. He went for, I think, 30 runs in his 2 overs. But Shivam Dubey came in as the impact batter. And I think when you've got that scenario, if you're not in your top 5 bowlers, you're not in the side. So you might be named as the impact bowler. And normally it's when things have turned to custard that you might come in as an impact bowler. As an impact batter, it's kind of like, well, let's keep going. We can go for another 5 overs here. We can go for another 3 overs here. Let's bring that, 7th or 8th finisher in. And they may be your second best finisher. I'm keen to get your view on this, Baldy. You've had a day or so to prep this, I think, haven't you?
Time.
Yeah. Thoughts on the ramifications of that and whether or not it's really fair. I don't know whether they'd have chased down 214 off 20 overs. But can't argue with the sheet as it stood last night.
So there's a couple of interesting things at play here. The Duckworth-Lewis-Stern algorithm is effectively a resource table that says, given the number of resources left and the situation in the match and how many runs to get, like, what is a par score effectively, and it uses history to decide that in terms of what's gone on before. What's very interesting about the IPL is that the introduction of an impact player skews in either direction depending on your bias and preference, whether or not the team now has more or less resources available to chase down that target. The batting team or the team chasing the target batting have potentially an additional batting resource to add to that, and you would argue that they would often add a top 6 batter to that chase if they haven't already done so. And the team bowling can potentially add, if they haven't already, an impact bowler. It depends and remains to be seen whether or not in their 15 they have those resources available to add to the mix. But I would say, not just based on this game, but looking at it kind of stepping back a little bit, that the team batting second has a bit of an advantage there because they have the capacity to add more impactful resources in the batting chase than a bowling team would necessarily add in a bowling chase. For example, it's unlikely that a team would leave as a potential impact player their best or second best bowler, but they may leave out their 5th or 6th best batter, or they may leave out another good finisher. They may leave out a Dre Russell or someone like that and bring them in as an impact player, in which case the batting side has a distinct advantage in this particular situation, which I don't think the DLS system, as it has been written in the past, will have come to terms with that change in resourcing, and that really does skew the potential chase. I've got another point, but I want to come back to you. I want to come back to that afterwards to open up to you, Raj.
When you mentioned their previous results, it doesn't take into account localized result. So I guess that's probably where we look at the system as an imperfect system, but the best of a bunch.
Yeah.
And chasing 214 and adjusting that score for somewhere in India versus the MCG, for example, is going to have bigger impact.
Absolutely, and the algorithm uses lots of previous results to try and I'm going to use these terms advisedly, average out the impact of venues and dew and time of day and opposition and all the rest of it, right? So very, very big sample data gives skewing towards the mean, if you like, or towards whatever measure of average they choose. The other thing that I think is relevant is there has been a trend in this IPL, and we've talked about it here on the podcast, towards big scores being achieved. And I think 214 3 years ago would have been almost an outlier score, whereas in this IPL it has been not quite par but very close to. So you have to have a think about, and we don't really know the answer, I haven't deep dived into it, but it would be interesting to know when it gets towards those outlier scores, say a team makes 500, how many pieces of sample data do you have that goes into what constitutes a par score? There's obviously less games that the team's got 500. But if you have a look at it, so Gujarat made 214 off their 20 overs. CSK effectively set 170 off 15 overs. Those last 5 overs, if they had gone the distance, the par score is only 40 runs off those 5 overs.
Yeah.
In the context of this IPL, that doesn't seem like a lot.
I think they were well placed to chase down 214. I mean, look, obviously everything changes. You chase the target that you're given. I mean, you think back to the 2015 World Cup semi-final, when New Zealand, South Africa looked like they were on for an enormous score, and then New Zealand gets the reduced score, and I'm sure, well, whether they would have gone about it differently, who knows? But I'm sure just when you bring down the score, I think there's more opportunity to get it. I think when there's more margin for error. I think in some ways that you can afford to be 8 down or 9 down or whatever, and you saw that with the CSK chase. They did certainly, after that rain break from ball 1, they were just going. Conway hits his second ball for 6 over cover point. Gaikwad was hitting boundaries straight away, and they just kept going in that power play, and then it just kept on the momentum. But it's still a fantastic chase to get that score.
Look, there's no doubt it's a fantastic chase. I just think that when you put these localised rules in, and I guess the Big Bash would be the same with the extreme delivery driver or whatever they have, sponsored by Domino's.
X Factor things, yeah.
Yeah, and I think you've got to take that into consideration. And look, we might be sitting here and Mr. Duckworth, Lewis or Stern may drop into the DMs and say, hey, no, we factored that in, and we factored in the dew, and we factored in that this was the first time a game had been played at 1:37 in the morning as well. But I don't think that they will have necessarily got that far in terms of those algorithms. But I think it would have been, just before you jump in, Raj, the highest chase in an IPL final. If they'd have pulled it off that 214.
Do you think that there is an issue with it, or are we just asking the question around whether it's accurate? The reason I'm asking this is because obviously it was very entertaining. Came down to the last ball.
Yeah. I think when we look at how quickly, and Bordy made the point around, the 200 probably not being an outlier score anymore, I think we have to take that into account. And look, I'm no mathematician, so I don't know how you're necessarily going to do that. But I think what you're definitely seeing, if you look at the stats from this game, Rahane, Rayudu, Ravi Jadeja all struck at over 200, but over a really short period of time. Now, granted, they only had a really short period of time to do that. But if you look at the innings of Gujarat, Shubman Gill struck at nearly 200, but over arguably more balls. Sai Siddharthan, again, 204 strike rate over a lot longer period of time. And I just wonder how that's taken into account, to give that. It felt for me as if that 170 off 15 was a little bit light. But again, that's just, a little bit like the Cricketing Hall of Fame, which will hopefully drop into your feed, very shortly. We're the purveyors of the eye test. Bordy's the man who actually does the hard work around the statistics. We've not really talked about Conway. Let's talk about Conway.
We can do that. I mean, yeah, like we said last week, we could talk about him for.
Is he the best 3-format player in the world?
Yeah, I think we might have said that.
Ravi Jadeja.
At some point. I think you did pretty well saying. I think your prediction last week was Conway getting 80 odd. He didn't obviously get 80 odd, but he player of the match in the final.
You've got to extrapolate that over the 20 overs, so it's it's pretty close.
Exactly. Yeah. What's another 25% on top of that? So yeah, you're right. Not far off that, but. Honestly, I mean, you're running out of superlatives for this guy. He's just done it. I think the thing that struck me in that final was just that he just looks so composed, and I think that's what's always been so impressive about him is that, yeah, no matter what scenario, what kind of level he steps up to, he just always looks in total control. And that innings, like I said, he had his second ball over cover point for 6. He smoked Josh Little for a massive 6 over wide long on at one point, and he was in complete control. And that's why it was so shocking when he went out, actually. But, the ball just kind of stuck in the wicket off Noor Ahmad, and he could have just chipped it to mid-off, and he looked furious with himself, and I'm sure he was, because I think he probably thought, I could get 100 here and just cruise this in.
Kind of interesting, he doesn't feature in the top 10 of the MVP list for the tournament, which... he's clearly in the
bizarre, isn't it? Really, when he's had that good a tournament.
I think that might be strike rate. I think the MVP stuff, is skewed. Like strike rate gets a higher rating a little bit in that. It accounts for guys that are finishers who come in
the
and
25
smash
off 9 type.
Yeah. Whereas he's played. I think what was he about 5th? I think in the top run charts.
He was 3rd in the run charts.
Third,
3rd in the run charts. 672 at 59. Strike rate 139, which is the same as Kohli's. Interestingly, who was immediately behind him in those run charts. And David Warner actually popping up at 8th in the run charts, although average way down there 36
and didn't face Stuart Broad at all in that IPL.
Certainly not around the wicket.
Back on Conway, I think
No, we're done.
He made a few comments after that about it being the best win of his career, and I think that sort of rubbed a few people here in New Zealand up the wrong way. But the more I thought about it, I feel like that's a legitimate comment. And obviously he won the World Test Championship, and that would be special in a lot of different ways. But if you kind of think about what the IPL I guess has become, and it's a 2-month kind of long thing, and I think that's why I love the World Cup, because it's an extended period of time. So you really do get a tight-knit group. You're playing in front of 75,000 people at 1:30 in the morning. It's come down to the last ball. You're sitting next to MS Dhoni. Like, all of these things, your team's up. You're about to win. Then it's 10 off 2. Then Jadeja goes 6-4. Like, that would have been an unbelievable moment that he is never going to forget for the rest of his life. And I can see why you would feel that. And it's life-changing for him, because next time they come to that auction, he's going to get a massive paycheck. So
it's the best cricket in stag do in the world, isn't it, the IPL?
Well, exactly.
You talked about it as being the best win of his career. It's now probably the biggest tournament in the world. Like, from a length perspective, it's longer than the World Cup. There's more money in it.
It's longer than 4 World Cups.
Yeah. There's more money in it than the World Cup.
Easily.
There are 10 teams, all with terrific players in them. Sure, there aren't all of the internationals, but it is a terrific tournament now, and it's unbelievable how successful it's been. Now, maybe it's not unbelievable, but it's incredible how successful it's been, and it might be the biggest It might be the biggest prize for an individual player in world cricket.
Give us your thoughts on Mohit Sharma's over. I thought it was actually pretty good up until probably the last 3 balls.
I think really it's GT's bowlers nearly got them over the line 2 years in a row. Shami, Mohit and Rashid, top 3 wicket takers in the tournament.
Don't forget Noor Ahmad, who was fantastic in that final. That spell that he bowled is going to get forgotten in history because they didn't win. But that was amazing. 2 for 15 or something off his 3 overs.
So I don't know the context of this. So I guess we'll talk about that last over. But as a bowler, I'm looking at you. Sorry, Baldy. Yeah, but 2 balls to go. 12th man came on to the field and slowed things down for a minute, 90 seconds, something like that. The guys just delivered 4 spot on Yorkers, and then obviously has gone for that, fifth Yorker.
Which was pretty much spot on
Which
as
was
well.
pretty much
Jadeja
spot on.
stepped back and hit that that's an amazing shot.
So I think, sometimes we don't give credit to the batters because it is become a real batsman's game. But I'm just interested from a bowling perspective whether that was the right call to actually slow it down there when you've actually got 4 balls in for 3 runs scored. I think at that point there was 1 dot ball and 3 singles. And then to slow it down and maybe just let Ravi take a little bit of a breath. What would you have wanted as a bowler in that situation?
Personally, probably I would have wanted to just keep going, yeah. Now that you say it. I was sort of someone who definitely got in a rhythm and just wanted to keep going. When I was bowling well, I'd bowl my overs quickly, and you're sort of almost bowling them without thinking. Although you obviously are thinking about different things, but it's happening without you stopping to think about it. And when you start thinking about it, is when you start thinking about what can go wrong as well in those situations. But I've seen there's quite a lot of comment, people putting their 2 cents in about what happened, the way he bowled that over, because I don't really think you could bowl 6 Yorkers better than what he did in terms of actually delivering.
Well, the last ball was garbage, wasn't it?
Last ball wasn't good, but the other 5, and if you think about when someone tries to bowl 6 Yorkers, they never hit all 6. Like, it's actually, people just don't do it. The comments that I've seen have more been around, I think Jimmy Neesham, I saw him send a tweet that basically said, like, this is why it's not as simple as just run in and bowl your 6 Yorkers.
Yeah.
You have to actually mix it up. And, a lot of people were talking about, he's got the slower ball out of the back of his hand and how difficult that is to pick and predict. And if you are just bowling 6 Yorkers, you can get in a rhythm, and that's what I guess Jadeja did and smashed those 2 over the fence.
Shami in that penultimate over, I think he only let in about 8 in that 19th over. I think really set it up well, and I actually really feel for that last ball, because it's not one of those ones like the ball before that was just absolutely went exactly where Jadeja wanted that to go. It's one of those ones that's nipped around the corner and just beat the short third man.
Fine leg up. Yeah,
it was a horrible feeling, I can imagine.
Yeah. Look, never been in that position. Bordy, you're the other bowler at the table. Anything you want to add?
I don't know. Like, if I was a bowler,
but then again, no.
And thank you very much. Or a man. I think I'd want to pause before that last ball, because I would, if I was clear in my mind about what I was doing, I would want the batsman thinking all those same potentially negative thoughts about what I'm thinking. Is he going to bowl the same thing? Is he going to bluff? Is he going to double bluff? Where am I going to hit it? I guess the longer you think, the more the batsman has time to plan and look at the field and go, if it's short, I'm going to go here, and if it's full, I'm going to go here, and they get to pick their plan. But I think back to Shane Warne quite a bit when in these kinds of situations. He would slow the game down. He'd make the batsman think. He'd make him think double. He'd make him think triple. He'd talk to the wicketkeeper about what they were going to have for dinner that night. He would just play those mind games. And I just wonder if you have to play the mind game that makes you more confident. And if the mind game that's making Stu more confident is to go bang, 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 then that's the game that you should play. And, every bowler should know when they get to that level what the mind game is, or what the thing that is that they're going to do in that scenario. For me, I'd slow it right down.
I know exactly what you would have done. You would have run up on that last ball and just pulled out last minute, given the non-striker some words about staying in his crease.
Exactly. And then gone back and do it all again. Exactly. Don't go early. That's my message.
I did think it was pretty awesome that Hardik Pandya, the way he sort of reacted to that, and certainly the way he went over to Mohit, and I think the way he's carried himself once again this year.
He's a good leader. He's a really good leader.
India needs to get him as their white ball leader sooner rather than later. I think
that's what the rumblings are, that he's going to be the white ball
and he's
captain
quite gracious in defeat too.
He was
clear
amazing.
that he doesn't like losing, and that's fine. But he was quite gracious and quite effusive in his praise for MS Dhoni and his position in the game. And you kind of get to see who people are in those kind of situations and what they're kind of made of. And I was really impressed with the things that Hardik said and the way that he carried himself after what was a nail-biting and ultimately very deflating defeat at the last moment.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like I said, I think he needs to be elevated pretty soon. And
I would agree.
You talking about leadership, we've got to, 25 minutes and we haven't talked about Dhoni. I mean, it was scripted perfectly, wasn't it? He walks out to bat. They need whatever it was, 25 or something to win when he comes out, and everybody in the world watching that game is probably going, okay, cool. He's going to hit this. He's going to hit the winning runs, and then he's going to walk off in a blaze of glory and all this kind of stuff. And he gets out first ball, and it just doesn't happen. But obviously, then they win, and he's got his arms around. It wasn't quite the Fleming, Dhoni, Conway hugathon that I thought it might be, but he's hugging Ravi Jadeja with tears in his eyes, and there's been some awesome footage. I mean, and then he comes out afterwards and sort of says, I might go around it for another year. I mean, it sort of started me thinking, where is Dhoni in like the pantheon of Indian cricketers? Because I think when we did when we're doing the Hall of Fame, he was quite low down from memory.
As a test
cricketer, and obviously, maybe white ball would be better. But even when you look at his stats, he's not really in the ballpark of some of the great players that they've had. But it feels like he's so revered. Like we've known this for a while. This is not revelatory stuff. But every time you see him, Sunil Gavaskar and Deepak Chahar, like his teammates, and Sunny Gavaskar, who is like one of those people who'd be on the Rushmore of Indian cricketers, they're going up to MS Dhoni after that game and getting his autograph. It's like imagine if I just came and got your autographs after the podcast. It's like we're teammates. What is going on here?
But yeah. I think he's just got that gravitas, hasn't he? He's got something about him as a leader. I think regardless of his own results, I think one of the things about that, drilling that ball to cover, is it just shows that he's human and he doesn't write his own scripts all of the time, because there was that expectation that was tailor-made for him to come in and biff a few sixes, walk off with his 100-year-old pads and kind of I wonder whether he would have gone round again then if he'd have kind of hit those winning runs. It'd be hard probably to let the emotions of that not sort of go, do you know what, that's it. But I guess if he's fit enough, and from a keeping perspective...
you'd have been frothing about that stumping.
Well, so this is the thing, and look, I don't want to go into technique for too long, but could talk about it all day. The way that, the technique that he's now got, which is that you don't actually give a lot with the hands. So it used to be always, your length of catch and give with your hands and then bring the ball back to the stumps. He has now, almost pioneered this really, really hard... your hands stay on a line that are, literally 6 inches from the stumps, and it's about getting that extra split second. And I've seen an Instagram clip today. It took 0.1 seconds for him to take the bails off.
So fast.
0.1 seconds.
And there was a huge wicket as well. Gill.
And I think what won't, and I'm just going to geek a little bit, because if you'd have bowled someone through the gate, you guys would be talking about it for 4 weeks. So I'm going to have a minute on this.
Fair enough.
If MS Dhoni had bowled someone through the gate, we might have been talking about it for longer than 4 weeks.
But I think what's really, really impressive is that he's still obviously working so hard on his technique, because if you look at the position he gets himself into, again, it's a minor thing, but as a keeper, as a kid, you're always told to stay down as long as you can and only come up after the ball is pitched. And I think a combination of the fact that he's probably a little bit older and the hamstrings might, give him a bit of jip, but also he's now actually using his experience, he's using the fact that wickets are probably pretty good. He's actually in position earlier. He's predicting the bounce before it bounces, and that's what allows him to get into that position to affect some of those rapid stumpings. This one had been out anyway, right? But there's been others throughout the course of the tournament where the speed of his hands, it is just absolutely something to behold. He's still, I think as a keeper, he's underrated in the pantheon of world wicket keepers.
Going back to that pantheon, leading back to that, I think it's hard with India because there's so many individual cricketers who have scaled the heights of numbers when you look at numbers to sort of judge where he sits on the pantheon. But you look at how the Indian teams of the late 90s, early 2000s had all those superstars, but they just couldn't corral them all into one sort of direction. MS Dhoni was able to not only do that, but set them up for success through that 2010s phase, handing it over. He handed over a team that was focused on that one goal winning away from home to Virat Kohli and Ravi Shastri, and it really allowed them to dominate overseas.
I would love for him to retire now. Very few people get to write a script where they finish with a really big moment in a final where they get to go out and win a tournament. Very, very few athletes get to go out on that level of a high. Very few athletes get to achieve that level of success of winning a major tournament, a World Cup, a championship, a World Test Championship final, whatever you want to, draw the parallel to. He has got this, now what have they won? 6 titles, CSK now, something like that. They've won a lot, and he's been, instrumental to a good portion of those wins. I would love to see him go out on just this massive high, and the legacy being that Dhoni walks out at the very top of the game of cricket.
I'll tell you what he says to that, because that people have said the exact same thing, and he said, circumstantially, this is the best time to announce my retirement, but the amount of love I've received all over, the easy thing would be to walk away from here. But the harder thing would be to work hard for 9 months and try and play another IPL.
Isn't that a terrific response from
That
a
was
terrific
awesome.
leader? And
I loved that.
we talked about like analogies for players and stuff. And the more that I see of MS Dhoni, the more that he reminds me of someone like Bill Russell. You know, not statistically the greatest player who's ever played basketball, but if you measure success by winning, Bill Russell and MS Dhoni have won just about everything there is to win in the sport, and they've carried themselves with such aplomb and such, you know, in New Zealand, mana, gravitas, whatever you want to call it. He is so well respected and revered because he is a leader who leads by example, and he's humble, and players play for him. Previous Indian sides haven't.
Yeah.
This Indian side does, and they play for Kohli and they play for Rohit. But first and foremost, like the genesis of that was playing for MS Dhoni, Raj, and you're absolutely right. An incredible cricketer, and like his impact when people look back in 100 years' time at his batting stats, they will belie the fact that he was such a terrific leader, and he just made everyone around him better. You know, it made him far better than they otherwise would have been.
And Bill Russell wouldn't have taken that stumping either. But,
Long way down for him to reach.
have we got anything else on the IPL before we move on?
Well, I wouldn't mind talking about Stephen Fleming just for a little bit because, I mean, basically, you watch that, you watch him. I mean, you watch him coach at any level. You listen to him on commentary, and you, as a New Zealand fan, you think, please, can you be involved in New Zealand cricket somehow? How do we do that? Like, honestly, because he's got such a good gig at CSK. He comes home, does the commentary. He probably gets paid more than New Zealand cricket can offer him just to work for that. Well, now it's 2 months or whatever it is. I'm sure he does a lot of work for them outside of those times at the games. But how on earth can New Zealand cricket make it appealing for him to start moving into some sort of international coaching and get the benefit of all the experience that he's had, coaching players like MS Dhoni, working with people like Mike Hussey, all the cricket that he's played around the world, and working in those high pressure environments. I mean, I feel like, you know, New Zealand, like we've talked about, there's every chance that after this World Cup, there's going to be a turnover of New Zealand coaches.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be amazing if we could get Stephen Fleming with Shane Bond as our bowling coach and Daniel Vittoria as our spin coach? Like all of this talent is out there, but because of these franchise tournaments, we can't. I don't know how New Zealand can compete with that and actually get them in the door.
Well, you certainly can't have a full-time coaching staff of Vittori, Bond and Stephen Fleming or Brendan McCullum. Brendan McCullum for different reasons, you can't have him hands off. But look, I think the reality is, and you asked this question on Twitter, and I meant to reply from the top order and actually replied from my own Twitter handle. And look, I said something along the lines of, you've got to offer him, which format do you want to focus on? You give him that format, you tell him it's 100 days of the year or whatever, you let him go and do his IPL gig. Because I think ultimately he probably makes more money from the Fujitsu heat pump commercials than he would from New Zealand cricket. Look, I'm being slightly facetious, but he doesn't. He probably doesn't need that money. So it's what's the attractive option for him to be able to do that? Is that a director of cricket role? But again, I think it comes down to. And the other thing I'll just ask you really quickly: we're in the World Test Championship final. You've made the semi-finals of the World Cup. Is he really? Are you saying that you need him to go that extra little, that little mile, particularly in the white ball stuff?
I'm not saying you've heard me talk many times. I've been very positive about the coaching staff. Obviously, I've got a personal connection to one of them, which helps that. But I like you said, New Zealand's had an incredible run of the way that Hesson and McCullum and then Stead and Williamson, what they've done, that you cannot argue with the numbers that the results that they've put over a really long time now. It's more that I think that cycle is now coming to an end, and we're heading into a cycle where we've talked about it a bit as well, that players are maybe going to start cycling around as well, and I just think that when you watch him, he's there's clear, we always thought that, even when he was playing, that he was, we here in New Zealand always thought that, he's the best captain in the world. He's got such an intelligent mind. You just want to harness that and get him into your system.
Yeah, and just to sort of second that, I think we're closer to the dusk rather than the dawn. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think we're at the moment in terms of our life cycle, and we need to look at what we do for the future. But you hit it on the nail on the head there. It's actually not necessarily about money. It's more about time. Like when we had Bondi on the show a couple of years back, he said that he spent 200 and something days away from home. You know, it's just why would you do that when you can get the same amount or maybe even more for 6-8 weeks work in India? And if we can break that down into the formats and present a package like that.
I think that the package that you present to Stephen Fleming has got to be along the kind of lines of the Japanese kind of ikigai quadrants of satisfaction, right? Like,
absolutely.
So really quickly.
Please carry on.
Ikigai is things you love, things you're good at, things you paid for, and things that kind of benefit stuff. And I don't think New Zealand are going to win Stephen Fleming by appealing to his sense of things you get paid for, because he can get paid far better elsewhere. And I think, generally speaking, for all cricket fans out there, if you think that you can appeal to players to play international cricket going forward by appealing to their sense of financial benefit, those days are gone. They are over. We are done with that. Like full-time contracts, IPL contracts have put that to bed immediately. You want someone to play for New Zealand going forward, the next generation of Devon Conways have to be sold to by their national body on something other than money. And so that either has to be loyalty to the badge, the concept of the black cap, something they stand for, the love of the game, which could appeal to Stephen Fleming, and how does he help create a legacy for New Zealand cricket? Yeah, some kind of achievement, right? Can you help us win a World Cup for the first time? Those are the things that I think will potentially appeal to Stephen Fleming going forward. It can't be about money. It has to be about one of those things. And creation of value for New Zealand, for basically every nation other than India going forward, for players and coaches alike, have to be about establishing a culture, having some sense of value in the jersey and pride in the jersey, and being able to create a legacy, because that's the only thing that they've got left.
Well, and I think to round out that point, I think that the CEO appointment for New Zealand cricket is going to be really, really important, in that we need someone that's going to be forward thinking in that way. Because we've had the same conversations about players, we're having the same conversation now about coaches, and the people, you've already seen the stories that Trent Bolt would love to play in the tests against Australia and South Africa next summer. We've already seen, New Zealand contracts about to come out. We've seen the stories, maybe Neil Wagner's not going to be on that list, or, all these sort of things that they're going to have to navigate, and they're going to have to figure out, like you just said, we can't compete financially with these big franchise tournaments that aren't going away, that are going to continue to expand. How do we still get them all of those aspects that we want, and make sure that we have the right people on at the right time, and be flexible enough without incentivizing people to leave?
Yep.
So there's so many different things to navigate, and I think it's really important that they get the right person in that position.
Really, really hard without a leader, without a CEO, to establish a really strong vision for New Zealand cricket. Like, if you had asked all four of us around this table to go away for 5 minutes and come back with what is the vision for New Zealand cricket, I reckon we get 4 different answers right now. We don't know, because there's an outgoing CEO, there's an incoming CEO. We're not going to know what his vision is until he gets in and gets his feet under the table. Like, these things are going to take time, and unfortunately it's going to mean a transitional period for New Zealand cricket where we kind of have to figure ourselves out a little bit again.
I would have had those quadrants you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, look, the perfect place we left that was after your Japanese philosophy, to be honest, Bordy, because that's all I'm thinking about now, and how we can weave more of that into the podcast. But so we can all just regroup and maybe, what's it called again? Ikigai.
Ikigai, yep.
If we can all harness that Ikigai, we'll be back after the swish to talk about England versus Ireland. Welcome back to the Top Order podcast. We're going to talk a little bit about England versus Ireland, the first test of the English summer. I think in the Slack notes we've got, is this just a warm-up for the Ashes? I mean, clearly it is, right? But look, I think in terms of, there's a number of talking points. So we've obviously got the World Test Championship final hot on its heels as well, that starts the following week, which we'll preview next week, India versus Australia. But this game is at Lord's. It's a 4-day test match.
Is it?
It's a 4-day test match.
I did not
read
know
that in the articles.
Why?
So we'll come on to that. So you can find your prep.
I don't have much prep for this. So
and then I guess the second component is, we talked IPL obviously before the break. Couple of Irish players, Josh Little, as was playing in the final last night for Gujarat, not going to play obviously in this Test match. And I think they've been quite open about talking about the preference for white ball cricket. So look, I just really wonder what this means when you've got a nation that was granted full Test status, 4 years ago, probably. I think they played 2019 against England at Lords. Again, that was a 4-day Test match, famous for them rolling England for 75. Jack Leach's 92 opening the batting for England, got them back in the game. And then they have played some tests on the subcontinent, so 3 tests earlier this year, Ireland away, Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. Lost all 3, but I think have had some decent performance, a couple of Test hundreds for Paul Sterling and Lorcan Tucker, the keeper.
Yeah, looks good.
But yeah, what are our thoughts on, I guess that, this is the curtain raiser, I suppose, for the Test match season, particularly coming so hot on the heels of such exciting white ball cricket in the IPL.
Yeah, I mean, the longer that England continue to underestimate Ireland, I think the more it plays into Ireland's hands, really. I think if England go into the Test match going, it's a warm-up for our summer, it's a curtain raiser for the Ashes, any kind of attitude of that nature, and I'm sure that that's not the attitude that the players and the squad are taking into the game, but I wouldn't have thought so either. But if there's any inkling of that in, consciously or subconsciously, Ireland will take advantage of that because they'll be up for this game big time. It's a traditional sporting foe, traditional political foe, if you like. They will get up for this game big time. Like they will have nothing more prideful on the line than a victory in Test match cricket against England. So they will absolutely be up for the game. There's lots of exciting young players in that Ireland side. There's lots of veterans as well, some guys that are maybe more, I think, to your point earlier, Raj, that towards the dusk end of their career than the dawn. But there's some exciting players in this Ireland side, and Ireland are going to continue to improve over the course of the next 3 or 4 years. What really excites me is that the game's at Lords. That England have made a decision, given that there's a World Test Championship final and the marquee Ashes series, Australia v England this summer, to play this particular Test match at Lords. I just think that's a fantastic move.
It excites you. It makes me a little sad that it's at Lords because I feel like the magnitude of this game, it's a Test match at the home of cricket, and I feel like both sides may not be prioritising it ahead of other things like the Ashes or the white ball cricket. Ireland have made a point of saying that their focus is on the 50 over qualification they're going to go into next month.
18th.
Little was always going to be rested for this test, even if he hadn't gone so deep into the IPL. It brings me to this question for you, Binksy. Do you view this game as a warm-up? We've used that word a lot at the moment. What do you want to see? Do you want to see some runs from the top order, 20 wickets taken by the bowlers, and that bowling?
Both of those things.
And that bowling unit in particular, it's not really going to have any bearing on what that 11 is because you're going to have Anderson coming back in, you're going to have Robinson or Wood coming back in when they are fit and off baby duty.
Yeah, look, I think that the reality is, and we've talked about this a hell of a lot, there's less and less time now in schedules for warm-ups, for tours like there used to be, I suppose, where you'd have a few county games. And look, I think the reality is, in terms of the warm-up for the England guys, you've had Crawley and Duckett playing red ball cricket for their counties. So for Kent and Nottinghamshire, Duckett's had a pretty decent start to the season. Crawley's had, he's what you would expect. He's had 170. He's had 90 off 13 balls, and then he's had nicked off in the other 6 knocks. Yeah. You've had Harry Brook tuning up in the IPL with 100 and then bugger all else. You've had Joe Root mixing the Gatorade and doing a bit of dancing, and then you've had Ben Stokes. Ben Stokes injured. Mark Wood.
Ben Stokes will get a medal, would he?
Yeah, well, of course he will.
IPL medal.
But yeah, so look, I think in terms of the way that the teams have tuned up for this, Anderson, Broad and Robinson have actually got some overs in their legs in the county game as well. Jack Leach also. So I think they've kind of already done that. And if I'm being brutally honest, I think that the plan is now around, there is a little bit of workload management because all these test matches come very, very thick and fast. And that's the same for Australia as well. They go almost from the World Test Championship final into a back-to-back Ashes series. Yep. And England are going to go from this test, couple of weeks off with the World Test Championship final, and then into that into that Ashes series. So I think that, the only real things to play for in this Test match are who are the bowlers that might be the first alternates, I suppose. If everybody's fit, you'd expect that Broad and Anderson and Robinson will line up against Australia in 2 or 3 weeks' time. It's really who's gonna come in and really sort of bolster those seaming stocks with Ollie Stone injured, with Jofra Archer injured. With some injury worries around Craig Overton and some of the guys that have played over the course of the last 2 or 3 years as well.
Well, yeah, I want to get your thoughts on Josh Tongue because I knew nothing about him. But before we do that, I think why don't we touch a little bit on Josh Little, because I think it's fascinating and I guess more around the framing of when this game is happening and I suppose what it means and why it is even 4 days. Like, I guess we have talked about a lot of the stuff already, and the franchise stuff is taking over. That Test match cricket is becoming minimised and all that stuff. But we from our point of view want the game to grow, right? You want to see. We've talked a lot about trying to get different nations involved in the game at the international level, and then you see this: Ireland gets a Test match. Not that they've said Josh Little. I think there's been 2 different lines of conversation around the Josh Little stuff that I've seen. I think one of them, Heinrich Milan, the former Aces coach who's now coach of Ireland, was trying to put a really positive spin on it, saying, look, what we really hope is that that massive stage of the IPL, that there's kids in Malahide running in and going, look, I want to be on that stage in front of 75,000 people at 1:30 in the morning and fireworks going off and all of that kind of stuff, and that can be a really inspirational thing for Irish cricket. But then you think, like, is Josh Little just never going to play? Like, is he just not going to feature for Ireland? And if that's the case, like, are those same kids in Malahide going same way that maybe like Noor Ahmad is thinking, okay, well, my path to being an international or being a cricket star is trying to play franchise cricket, and it's not trying to play. I don't care about playing for Ireland, or I don't care about playing for Afghanistan, or all of these things. And yeah, I don't know. I've very mixed views about this situation and sort of feel like he should be playing in this game. And I mean, I don't know if he wants to play. It's obviously starting, like whether it would even have been logistically possible. But yeah, I don't feel good about the fact that he was always going to sit out of this game.
Well, look, I think logistically very difficult. The biggest thing for me is clearly the qualification for them for white ball tournaments that ultimately are going to be, rightly or wrongly, we can debate this till the cows come home, 10-team tournaments. That's where Ireland have really sort of probably made their name for themselves on the world stage. Yeah. And let's be honest, Josh Little hasn't played a Test match yet. I'm sure he will do. But I think he's been bowling 4 overs every 2 or 3 days for the last however many, 74 games or whatever. He hasn't, he's not in a position, I don't think, where it would be worth the risk for Ireland cricket to potentially have him have to bowl 20 overs on the first day at Lord's, come back on the second day and bowl another 15, and put himself in a position where he might not be able to bring the skills that he's developed in a 74-game IPL tournament to help his team qualify for a World Cup, which I think, if we're being brutally honest, we've talked about it, the IPL is a bigger stage for Devon Conway than a World Test Championship win, and also the white ball success he's had with New Zealand, reaching semi-finals of tournaments, etc. So you've got to think that from an Ireland perspective, they're probably thinking, our cup finals are those World Cup games, and it isn't a 4-day Test match at Lord's. That's really just a precursor to that, to that English season kicking off, I think.
I will just give Devon Conway a bit of credit. He did dial back that comment a bit today when he was he said it was the best T20 win of his career, which is
fair enough.
Sort of fair enough.
So England Baldy wants to know a little bit about Tongue. I want to know your thoughts on Chris Wokes. I'm a bit disappointed that he's not in the team, but I actually think it's going to be hard for him to get into this team. I know there will be, people being rested and load management, etc. But an all-rounder batting at 8, I don't know if fits into this side or not.
Yeah, look, I think Chris Wokes, he's been out probably for about a year now in terms of injury.
14 months, I think, last test.
So a dodgy knee. Look, I've not seen a massive amount of county cricket other than the highlights on the streams from this year. But a couple of friends who have has probably seen a little bit more cricket than me have said he's lost a little bit of nip. And look, I think you look at someone like, he reminds me a little bit of Tim Bresnan, who was really pivotal for England for 2 or 3 years, and then he actually had an elbow injury, I think, and lost a little bit of that nip, and all of a sudden he was a very good first class bowler. Look, I hope Woakes can find that fitness, but I think it's really, really telling that he was in the original squad for the Test match, and Josh Tonga's come in as a replacement into that squad as ostensibly cover for Anderson and Robinson, who are suffering with groin and tendon niggles, respectively. And has leapfrogged his way into the side, so named in the side alongside Stuart Broad and Matthew Potts as the seaming options. And unlikely, I'd suggest, that Stokes will bowl, in this Test match, particularly as it's a 4-day game as well. So, they're probably not going to need to bowl as many overs, you would think.
Is this an audition for the Ashes series between Potts and Tongue? I mean, Stuart Broad's obviously nailed on to play, I would imagine, at least in that first test, to try and win some mental battles against the Australian top order.
Round the wicket.
Round the wicket. Many slips in play. Is this, genuinely, is this an audition between those two to be the 5th seam option or 6th seam option? I mean, Stokes has said he wants 8, doesn't he?
Brendan McCullum said he wants 8 seamers. So I think the reality is, I might get this order slightly wrong, but I wrote this down. We've got Anderson, Broad, Robinson, Archer, Wood, Stone, Woakes, Stokes, Potts, Matthew Fisher, who played in the West Indies about 15 months ago, Overton, and now Tongue. So Tongue on that list is probably the 11th seamer. And he's now got an opportunity, as you say, probably to get himself into a position where he's the 5th seamer. Yeah, coming off an England Lions tour this winter in Sri Lanka. So got a 5 first over an 8 wicket haul in with the unofficial Test match there in Gaul. He's actually from I didn't play with him, but he's from my home club back in the UK, Barnard's Green Cricket Club. So I think he's been allocated to a different club within the Birmingham League, but certainly played, and his brother still plays for the club as well. By all accounts, a very, very gutsy cricketer. So in terms of burst onto the scene, was talked about as someone that could bowl, above 90 miles an hour. He's now not that express pace, suffered some injury concerns, and actually nearly was considering, I believe, actually retiring from cricket at the age of sort of 24, 25, because he couldn't get himself back fit for Worcestershire. So look, really, really good for him to be given that opportunity. And I think, we joked about it off air. He's probably bowled himself into contention, it sounds like, in the nets. He's impressed, whether it was a little spell at Stokes or whether McCullum got the pads on to go in and show them how to, reverse Dilshan or whatever. But yeah, he's obviously impressed in that couple of days before. Or maybe he's taking somebody off him on the golf course. We don't know. I don't know whether they've had any nets yet or whether they've just been down the driving range.
I don't have much more to add on this series. The only other thing I would want to say is that, there's a few of those Irish boys that I'm quite keen to see. Lorcan Tucker was who you named before. Yeah, I've been very impressed with him in the short time that I've seen him. Obviously New Zealand got a bit of an up-close look on some of those young guys like Harry Tector and Lorcan Tucker in that white ball series that we played against them when we were on our 15-month tour of Europe, wherever it was this time last year.
Yeah, look, I think the big thing for Ireland cricket, and you mentioned Tim Murtagh, I think, earlier on. One of the massive impacts on them is that their players now are, if you're playing for Ireland, you're actually classified as an overseas player in the county championship. Obviously, a hangover of Brexit that's affected the cricketing world. So I think a lot of these guys would be playing county cricket and developing that 4-day long form pedigree back in the Bosman, the EU days. So that's a really big factor, I think, that's probably going to inhibit Ireland's growth. But yeah, certainly looking forward to seeing those guys. Really looking forward to seeing Andy Balbirnie as well. I think he's a really, really classy player. Hasn't really got going in the Test game yet. So, I think, he'd be someone that would want to chalk up a couple of Test hundreds to add to his
just
add to his
one day in Sri Lanka or wherever it was, Bangladesh.
Add to his one-day tours. And the final thing, I think, we talked about it a little bit. I think we broke the news that Folkes was potentially not going to play. That's obviously transpired.
We broke the news.
Well
done.
When I say we broke the news, we just before that news came out, I think we were talking about it. I just want to sort of say, I think there's a lot going around this whole what happens if Johnny Bairstow drops a catch and, you've got to pick your best keeper. Those days have gone. And let's be perfectly honest, Johnny Bairstow is a pretty decent wicketkeeper. He's kept wicket since he was 13 years old for Yorkshire. He got the gloves, I think, harshly taken off him by Joss Butler when he was going pretty well. I think the conversation was actually more around how did they fit that batting lineup together with Folkes, and I think it was probably a Folkes versus Crawley decision rather than a Folkes versus Bairstow decision. The one worry I have is when you look at the stats, Bairstow's form batting in the second innings after having kept wicket. Go and look it up. He doesn't score a whole heap of runs.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting workload thing for Johnny Bairstow because when he was setting the world on fire previously, I don't think he had the gloves right. When he was averaging like 170 last summer and striking at 975, wasn't keeping wicket as well. So like that extra burden and that extra legwork is going to have.
He did have a 1,300 run year with the gloves.
Yeah,
not too long ago.
Yeah,
so he has done it, but a lot of those were first innings runs.
So interesting coming back from an injury, whether or not he's got the kind of the miles in his legs, as it were, to be able to manage that workload. I'm really looking forward to seeing Curtis Campher. Stu, I know no one asked me about who I'm looking forward to seeing from Ireland.
Baldy, who are you looking forward to seeing from Ireland?
I'm looking forward to seeing Curtis Campher. 24-year-old fellow's burst onto the international scene. You have a look at his record. It doesn't look really particularly exciting. I think he averaged like 70 with the ball and 30 with the bat, but he can play.
And what about his Japanese philosophy?
Strong.
Make things happen.
Yeah, he makes stuff happen.
Does make things happen.
Yep. Has a test 100. So good player. I like him. It's in the book.
Awesome. Well, boys, I think that probably does wrap up the podcast for us here. There is some other test cricket or unofficial test cricket going on as well around the world. So we've got West Indies out Bangladesh going on. We've got obviously England, Ireland. We've got the World Test Championship coming up, which we'll preview on next week's show, and also look out in your feed for the Cricketing Hall of Fame as well. So plenty more coming, and we'll be coming at you thick and fast with recordings throughout the course of this English summer. And Lippy will no doubt weave in some Rickerton references along the way. But
you got a Barnett Green reference?
Well, I think quite legitimately, because someone from that club is making their test debut, not just that, they went to Rickerton once and popped into the new world. But anyway, on that note, let's leave it here. It's good night and God bless from us all here in Auckland. We'll see you soon on the Top Order podcast. Good night.